So I have recently picked up sewing as a hobby, and so during this video I am going to be threading some elastic through a skirt that I'm currently working on, because this skirt I think is 4 yards in length. Today we are going to be doing my October wrap up. I felt like October was a really weird month for me. Once again, I don't have any statistics for you all because I just didn't feel like gathering them. Actually, I can tell you how many books I read. I read 14 books this month, and I only DNF'd 3, but I also put another book on pause, and I am currently reading 2 or 3 books right now. Something happens to me at the end of the year. I know that 14 books is like absolutely amazing, and lots of people dream of being able to read 14 books in a month, but something happens to me because that is a low number for me, where October, November, December, I just kind of stop reading as much. Normally, if you've seen any of my previous videos, I read somewhere between 15 and 19 books a month, and I do take this into account when I make my statistics for the year, that I will read significantly less as the year goes on. Let's get started. So a lot of these books that I'm going to talk about I will just reference. Basically, this month I did a lot of videos where I talked in depth about the books that I was reading. So I won't have a ton. This won't be the longest video in the world. This won't be the longest wrap up in the world. So I will quickly go over the books I DNF'd first. So the first one I DNF'd was the book Dune by Frank Herbert. Herbert? Yeah, that's his name actually. So this is the second time I've tried reading this book, and the second time I have DNF'd this book, which means that it is a sign that I am not supposed to read this book. I DNF'd it because I was bored. The second book I DNF'd was Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker. It was too young for me. I talk about that in my Reading Red video. And the final book that I DNF'd, in this one I apologize so much for, is Raybearer. I really wanted to love that book. I really wanted to give it a shot and try it out, and I thought I was going to love it, but the author had a lot of tell and not show, and the world building was absolutely amazing, but her writing was just not for me. But I still think it was a really good book and had a lot of merits, so if you're really interested in it, check it out still. So the book that I paused, I will talk about later because it's related to one of the books I actually read. Starting out from the top of the month, in the beginning of the month, I read 3 red books, and I have an entire video where I talk really in depth about those 3 / Over the Woodward Wall. And so for that, I ended up reading A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, It by Stephen King, and Lakewood by Megan Giddings, which I had to return to the library, so I can't hold it up for you. I rated A Darker Shade of Magic, which was a reread, 3.75. The time before when I read it, I rated it 5 stars, so that was kind of interesting. It, I rated 4.5 stars, knowing that the only reason why it didn't get 5 stars is because of how problematic the book is. And then Lakewood, I also rated 4.5 stars because I really loved it. It was super creepy and eerie and weird, just like I wanted, but the ending was way too fast and just wasn't developed how I would have liked it to be. So Darker Shade of Magic is a book about this sorcerer. He's called an Antari, and he can travel between the Londons, and there are 4 Londons. It's like alternate universes. There's Red London, which is full of magic, White London, which has magic but is collapsing, Black London, which has collapsed, and Grey London, which is like our London. It has no magic. It has King George III, I think. And so Kel travels between the worlds, bringing messages between the kings and queens of those realms, and he ends up running into a girl named Lila Bard, one of the Londons, and he brings her back, and there's this whole entire ordeal that happens, and if I explain more than that, I'll be spoiling some things. It was a really good book. The first time I read it, I loved it so freaking much. It was one of my favorite books of all time, and I felt like it was really special. The second read, like I talk about in that video, it just felt kind of predictable and stereotypical, and it just wasn't what I wanted it to be completely. It, on the other hand, I really fell in love with. It gave me nightmares one night. I wouldn't even call them necessarily nightmares because I wasn't like waking up screaming or anything, but I had some weird dreams one of the nights. I was super paranoid. If you watch the video, you actually get to see me freak out a few nights because I was like, oh my God, Pennywise is coming for me. So it gave me what I wanted. The issue with that book was its problematic content. It does take place in the 1950s and in the 1980s, and Stephen King didn't hold back any punches. I didn't live in those times, so I cannot say how accurate it is to what they truly are. All I know is what historians have told me of those times, and what I've grown to understand is though times were not great for people who were considered lesser. So basically, as long as you're not an able white man, you're gonna have a shit show. And Stephen King really, really focused on the horrors of humanity and really delved into hate and how hate can grow within a group of people. And while I truly do think that that was the impact he was trying to make and was trying to talk about all of the problematic issues that we're taking on at those places, I have read some other King books and they didn't need to have those problematic issues, and they had the same exact problematic issues. So I'm not totally convinced that Stephen King isn't just like a bigot. I'm sorry. I hear he's a great man, but it's just every single one of his books, it's like the women are getting beaten and the black people are being referred to as the N-word, and the R word is used and the F word is used, not the 4-letter one, the one that is derogatory for gay people. And I'm a little bit done with that. I'm not giving up completely on Stephen King because I loved this book, and I had decided that if I hated this one, I was going to not read another King book, but I really loved it. So I will be reading Salem's Lot next month, which I don't know if I said that in my TBR. So the next book I read was Lakewood, which is about a girl, a black woman, I should say. She's in college. Her grandma has just died. It's like page 1, her grandma's funeral. And her grandma was basically her mom because her mom had all these horrible medical issues and migraines, couldn't get out of bed, was in a wheelchair for most of her life, couldn't really be a mom because she was dealing with her medical problems. And so she's raised by her grandma is dead. She's trying to figure out how to pay for everything, college, her mom's house, her mom's medical bills, her grandma's funeral, all that jazz. And so she ends up signing up for some medical experiments, and the whole entire book has this great commentary on how every single drug that we used had to have been experimented on by someone, and the way that most companies, which are majority owned by and controlled by white people, go to impoverished places where they get people of color to do the experimentations. It was really good and really impactful and really weird. There was some body horror, there was some psychological horror. You're not sure what's real through most of the book, which I absolutely loved. That's the kind of stuff that really gets me, but like I said, the ending just wrapped up way too quickly for me. So the next book that I read was The Black God's Drum, which is by P. Djeli Clark, I believe. And this book, I read one of his other books recently, the Tramcar one, and I loved that one. This one I did not love though. It read very much like a short story to me. So we're following this young girl, I think she's like 12 or 13, and she finds out about the Black God's Drum, which is this weapon that can be used to destroy basically all of humanity, kind of a thing. And so she tries to trade the information about where it is to get passage on this ship, but the person who owns the ship, this woman, basically they have to go on an adventure together to prove that the information is valid. And both of them have a connection to the old gods of Africa because this is a futuristic society, but it takes a lot of history and weaves it into the story. So the Civil War is happening at the time, so there are Confederate and Union soldiers. It takes place in New Orleans, and it talks a lot about slaves being brought over, free slaves, enslaved slaves, and it has a lot of really good things to say, but unfortunately I didn't really like the story itself, so I wasn't attached to any of the characters or anything that was happening, and I really just wanted it to end, even though it was like a 4-hour audio book, I think, maybe. So I rated it a 2.5. The next book that I read was Steel Crow Saga, and this was my book club's pick for the month. This book is following a wide range of characters. We have kind of 2 storylines happening. So there's one where it's this soldier is transporting this prince, and the soldier has this shadow animal with her, and she can like call on its spirit at any time and it can fight for her. And the prince is the prince of like the enemy land, and he can control steel. And so she's bringing him because if he's brought to like this one place, then he's gonna provide peace for the people, something like that. And of course they run into a mishap and bad stuff happens and they're kind of on the run for a while. The other side of that is we are following a thief and a princess who is not related to the prince from before. The princess has another spirit animal, I can't remember exactly what they're called, and she needs the thief because she wants to find the prince and bring him to justice, kind of. And so she like rescues the thief on like death row, and the thief is like, I'll help you out if you teach me how to get a spirit animal. So they go on the journey to try and find the prince. And there's a lot more that happens. The book itself was just really long, and it felt like it didn't need to be that long. It felt like there was a lot of extra. It felt like the romance was forced and I didn't believe it, and it was way too quick. I didn't love most of the characters, and I felt way more attached to one storyline than the other one. So whenever I was in the head of the thief and the princess, I was like, I don't care. But when I was with the prince and the soldier, I was like, yeah, tell me more about these people. So I know that I've talked to people in my book club and not everyone feels that way, but almost all of us have agreed that the book just kind of read really, really long and did not need to be the length that it was. So I ended up rating it a 3.5 because I really liked what it was trying to do, but I feel like it missed out on some of the execution. The next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I did talk about this in depth in a video. It's the epic fantasy video that came out recently. Or no, it was the Reading Yellow book covers. Yeah, it was the Reading Yellow book covers, and I talk about this one a lot in that video, along with some of the other books I will mention shortly. So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Oh, I read 2 V.E. Schwab books this month. Was her newest release. A lot of people know about it. We're following a woman named Addie LaRue who makes a deal with darkness that in order to live forever, no one will ever be able to remember her. And so we follow her life as she lives 300 plus years, and we kind of get to see some more historical sides of France and a few other places, and then we get to see some of her current life because she runs into this boy named Henry who all of a sudden can remember her. And so she kind of tries to make a connection with him. He seems to have made a deal with another god. If you watch the video where I talk about it really in depth, you'll know lots and lots about it. I'll link all of these videos somewhere like I always try to do. So I rated that one 4.5. I felt like it was really, really good, but I felt like it could have honestly been more. The idea was really unique, but it was almost like the execution was average. But I enjoyed V.E. Schwab's writing, and I enjoyed some of the commentary she had to say, and overall I wanted to continue listening to it because I listened to the audiobook, and I can recommend the audiobook. It was quite enjoyable. So after that, in the same video, I listened to Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst, which I really enjoyed. It read more YA to me than adult, which I've seen it described as both online. So I think that it'd be safe for anyone to read, but just know going into it that it's not like adult. It's kind of in between YA and adult. This is the story of a trainer. She lives in this wonderful magic land where they race these monsters, and they race them on the sands, of course. And so she teams up. She has to earn enough money to provide for her daughter, who is being trained as an augur, and augurs are special people. They have magical abilities. Go watch that video if you want to know more about them. And the girl that she teams up with has run away from her family and is trying to earn some money so that she can pay them back for some stuff that happened. And so they team up and they decide that they're gonna win, and they get this special monster. And also we're following the soon-to-be emperor of the land. His brother was supposed to be the emperor, but his brother died, and he cannot ascend into the emperor's seat until they find the reincarnated animal that is holding his brother's spirit. So there's reincarnation in this, there's augur magic in this, there's monster racing in this. It was really enjoyable overall. I like a lot of what Sarah Beth Durst did. She surprised me, especially at the end of the book. There was some hard-hitting stuff that happened. I felt like it definitely could have been better. The first 50% I was wanting to rate the book 5 stars, but the second 50% I kind of just felt like it lost me a little bit. I ended up rating it 4 stars because I really enjoyed it, but there was just something about it that could have been slightly better. Okay, I am about 1/4 through reading this. So the next book I read, and this will be part of a video that's coming out very shortly. Apologies, I couldn't get it out in October, but I think it's coming out next week, next Monday. I read 3 Katrina Leno books and I really had a great time reading them. So I read them in this order. I read You Must Not Miss, The Half-Life of Molly Pierce, and then Horrid. So the front cover of You Must Not Miss is pretty popular now. A lot of people have talked about it. The Half-Life of Molly Pierce is a lot older of a book, so I don't know if people talked about it when it came out or not. And then Horrid is really new, and I think people are kind of talking about it right now because it's spooky season and this is more of a spooky book. From the side of this, you can probably tell that I absolutely loved You Must Not Miss. Super weird book, definitely not for everyone. It is definitely a YA contemporary with just some weirdness mixed in. So we are following a girl named Magpie. Her parents have recently separated because she walked in on her dad cheating on her mom, and so she is kind of dealing with life because her mom is an alcoholic and has gone back to drinking. Her dad is no longer in her life because he's left her mom. Her school grades are dropping. Her best friend has abandoned her because of an issue that you kind of get hints to throughout the book, but you don't find out what the problem is until the very end. And so Magpie has started writing in this journal to deal with this like issues that she's having. And so she writes about this land called Near. I'm gonna say one thing that is a slight spoiler, but I feel like if I don't say it, you're gonna go into the book and about halfway through the book, you're gonna be like, wait, what? Because it kind of takes a weird turn. So Near actually becomes a real place that she can visit and she can go to, and it's not just something in her head that she's created, and it actually starts to bleed over into the real world. And it's super weird, super unique book. I think you would like this book if, one, you knew what it was going to be going into it, if you're not kind of surprised by anything that happens, and 2, if you are a maladaptive daydreamer like I am and you tend to go into your own head whenever issues happen and you like escapism, anything like that. I think this book could be really enjoyed by you, but it is really weird. There's definitely some craziness that happens in it, but I loved it. It's really slow. There's not a ton of plot. I couldn't put it down. It was so enjoyable. So I ended up rating it 5 stars. I didn't read The Half-Life or Horrid next, but I'm going to talk about them next and then I'll go back to going in order. So The Half-Life of Molly Pierce, same author, is about this girl who, first chapter, she is driving away from this situation and she is starting to forget about stuff that's happening, and she kind of talks a little bit about how she's been having these blackouts more and more over the past year, and then she sees a horrible motorcycle accident in front of her and the boy dies basically in her arms, and he seems to know her. And so she runs into his brother in the hospital, and the brother also seems to know her, but keeps saying like, no, I don't know who you are, I don't know who you are. So Molly Pierce is just kind of having a hard time. She's not telling anyone about these blackouts, but she is seeing a psychiatrist, and eventually she starts to get suspicious that something is going on with her. So she starts seeking help, and the blackouts get worse and worse as she's seeking help. Now, I didn't absolutely love this book because of some of the subject matter that's discussed in it. So I'm gonna say it right now because if you watch the video next week, I say it then. Molly has DID, also referred to as dissociative identity disorder, or as it is no longer referred to as multiple personality disorder. And so the blackouts are when her alter is taking over, and her alter is a protector, I believe is the correct word. So whenever she is feeling unsafe, the alter takes over and takes care of the situation and helps her out. So yeah, that is a lot of spoilers, but if you read actually not the summary at the back of the book, but the summary on like the little inside page, it does mention those things. So I don't totally feel bad saying it to you. I didn't love, I think that Katrina Leno definitely did her research and definitely did a really good job of writing about DID. I myself do not have DID, do not know anyone personally who has it, but I do follow some YouTubers who have it, and so I've educated myself on the situation. But again, I am not someone with it, so I'm not the right person to talk about that side of it. But there were a few things that happened that, while everything felt very accurate and all of the wording was very correct, there were just a few things that happened that rubbed me the wrong way, and I talk about that in the video coming out next week. 3 out of 5 stars. I really liked Katrina Leno's writing in this one, even though I was less interested in the storyline. I wouldn't say I was less interested in the subject matter at all by any means, just in the storyline, because it is heavily based on a romance between a few characters, and so that just isn't my cup of tea. So then I read Horrid, which again, by Katrina Leno, and Horrid is about a girl, yeah, it's Jane. Jane and her mom moved to this little town. Anyways, Jane's dad has died recently, and so her and her mom have found out that when he died that basically they have no money at all because he was flying through it near the end of his life, and his death was sudden, heart attack kind of a thing. And so they, her mom had inherited a house when her grandmother died, but they didn't want to go there because her mom had bad memories about it, but didn't want to sell it either. So they end up realizing that it's going to be a lot cheaper for them to move out to this house in Maine than it is for them to stay in Los Angeles where they're at, and they can stay there for a year or two, fix up the house, sell it for a really good price, and then move back. And that's the plan. But when they get there, some really weird things start happening. It's kind of like a haunted house story, but there's some backstory and history behind it, and I really enjoyed myself. It was creepy, it was weird. It could have been creepy and weirder, honestly, but I liked it. It felt like I got to have both a slice of life teenage growing up story along with a spooky haunted house kind of a story. I wouldn't say there was ever a point where I was scared in the book, but there were definitely some moments where I was like spooked in the book. And I read most of it at night. I actually ended up reading The Half-Life of Molly Pierce one day and then Horrid the complete next day, totally by accident. I never wanted to put her work down. I really enjoyed Katrina Leno's writing, and I felt like I wasn't even tired of it by the end. It's very stream of conscience, so I know that not everyone will enjoy it, and it's very choppy, but it almost, to me, felt like how I think, and so it was super easy to get through because it was like, oh yeah, my brain doesn't have to translate at all because this is already set up for how I think about things. That was great. I enjoyed Horrid. Once again, I think it could have been creepier and weirder and more twisty-turny, but I really enjoyed it, and go watch that video. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. So moving back to right after You Must Not Miss, I read The Theft of Swords book 1, and then I started The Theft of Swords book 2, but I put it on pause because it just wasn't doing it for me. So I don't remember the actual names, but originally Michael J. Sullivan released 6 books in this series, and then Orbit bought it out a few years ago and turned it into 3 books, so 2 and 2, 2 and 2, 2 and 2. So Theft of Swords is the first 2 books, but I decided to split them up and count them as 2 separate books so that I could rate them separately, and I'm really, really glad I did this because I absolutely freaking loved the first one, and the second one I am struggling to get through right now, but I will talk about that in 2 seconds. First one, following these 2 men, they're partners, they're mercenaries, they'll basically do anything you want them to as long as you can pay enough for it. Of course, they're the age-old duo where one of them is really fun and one of them is really quiet and sinister and is probably going to kill you in your sleep. I love that duo. And so these 2 are hired by this man to pick up this sword so that he can fight in this duel. There's reasons, and when they get to pick up the sword, they are framed for the murder of someone extremely important, and while they're escaping, they kidnap the crown prince and they go on a journey with him to find this wizard. I don't know how much I want to say. I did talk about this and the next book I'm going to talk about in the epic fantasy video, which came out last Monday, and I really, really loved it. It felt like classic fantasy to me, but in a nice digestible size. I think the audiobook was 10 hours for that one, and I listened to it in like 2 days, I think it was. I probably could have knocked it out in 1, but like I said, I'm not in as much of a reading mood right now, so I'm going slower. Really enjoyed it. It was super classic fantasy. I like Michael J. Sullivan's writing a lot, and I like that he has positive masculine figures and powerful female figures. The second one, though, just didn't do it for me. The main girl in the story just felt so poorly written and so stereotypical fantasy female. Oh boy, she does all the cooking, all the cleaning. She gets all this dirt on her when they first meet her, and they're like, oh, but even though she's not pretty, you can tell that when you wash it off, she's gonna be gorgeous. And then they wash it off and she's like the most beautiful woman they've ever seen, of course. But I can't do that. So I'm trying. I really like Michael J. Sullivan and I really like his writing. Me and him are chill. So I want to continue, but right now is not the time for me to read that book. And I'm actually considering, I own the third and fourth one, just going on and trying those ones because I know that they're going to get better as they go, but I don't necessarily want to skip ahead, you know? That's on pause, no rating for that, but I don't know if I said it, so 5 stars for the first one. So after that, I read Sins of Empire by Brian McClellan, and I really enjoyed it. It to me felt so fresh and so good, even though it was a concept that I felt like with fantasy isn't new. So, oh my goodness, this one I have a really hard time explaining, and I talk about it a ton in that video about how it's hard to summarize this book, and now I understand why there's not really like a summary online that's easy to understand about this book. So we're following mainly 3 characters while this land is about to revolt. So we start the book out where these people have found this godstone. We don't really know anything about that until near the end, but we're following this one woman named Vlora, who is a mercenary, and she is leading these people, and she's called back to this city to kind of set up a sting operation where they're trying to capture some rebels. And then there's this man named Ben Syke, and he is let out of prison so that he can keep an eye on Vlora because this other man isn't so like the government hires Vlora to do her stuff, and then this other man is hired by this lawyer to follow her, and then there's this other guy, and I forget his name, but it's like Mikkel, I think, and he's hired by a different part of the government to watch for Ben. So it's like this weird circle where they're all watching each other, but there's so much more to the book and so much more plot, and it's hard to talk about. So if you want to know more about that, just go watch my video where I talk about it way more in depth. I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars because I really enjoyed it, but the last like 4 hours of the audiobook were a fight scene, and I grew so bored, and I felt like it could have been reduced so much. If you really like war and you really like fight scenes, you might not feel that way. You might think it's a 5-star read because everything else about it was really good. There's lots of twists and turns, lots of reveals, lots of cool magic that I didn't totally understand, but it was a really good book, and I think it would be a really good book to start out with in epic fantasy. Even though I couldn't tell you the best what it's about, I think that it was an easy read, and I think that it was easy to understand, and I think that a lot of people would enjoy it. The next 2 books I read were library books. I have returned them already, so I cannot hold them up for you, and they will be really in-depthly talked about in a video that'll be coming out very shortly after the Katrina Leno video. So here's a little spoiler alert. After I read 3 books by Katrina Leno and did a whole entire video on just reading her books, I really liked that setup, and I thought it would be fun to do again with a different author. So I am now reading A.S. King, which is going interestingly. So I have picked up and read already The Dust of 100 Dogs and Ask the Passengers. And I have also started Still Life with Tornadoes, I think is the title, but I don't think I'm going to actually read that book. You'll hear about that in the video though, not getting into that one. So The Dust of 100 Dogs was a really unique book, and I understand why it has such low ratings on Goodreads, because it's kind of a weird one to talk about. There's this girl and she is a pirate in the 1600s, and she's killed in the first chapter, and she is cursed to live the life of 100 dogs and have all of her memories. And so you'd think when you hear that we'd be following the life of 100 dogs and her like living experience as a dog and what she learns as a dog, and maybe she's like overcoming some challenges she has as a human. No, we start out as after she dies, waking up with her after having lived the life of 100 dogs as a human once again, after having already learned all of her lessons and her morals, and now she's just trying to get old enough where she's like legally allowed to leave her parents and go off and find her buried treasure. Really interesting, really weird. I enjoyed it for the most part. I'm going to be talking about it a ton in that video that'll be coming out shortly, so I will leave you with the fact that I rated it 3.5 stars, but it could have been a 4-star if the ending was different. So after that, I read Ask the Passengers, which follows a girl named Astrid, she's not feeling loved in her life at all. She has a secret relationship because she is struggling with the fact of whether or not she is a lesbian, and she can't tell her parents, can't tell her best friend who is in the closet gay but has told Astrid that she is gay, and she just feels like no one actually loves her for her. Her mom is a workaholic and agoraphobe, so she never leaves the house, and they just moved out to this small town from New York City, and so she's dealing with the gossip and the busybodies of a small town. This school, I think she's like a senior in high school, and a lot of the people in this small town do not believe that gay people should have rights or should be able to get married. So she doesn't know whether or not she is actually gay because the only person who seems to love her is a woman, and she's just appreciative of that attention, or if she is actually gay. She doesn't know if she's gay, or she doesn't know if she's just appreciating the attention. It's interesting though, because the attention that she is getting from this girl is definitely not positive, and I think I would have liked the book a lot more if they talked about how negative that attention was, that even though Astrid was receiving love of a kind, it was not the kind of love that your partner should be giving you. Her partner was pressuring her into doing a lot of things that Astrid repeatedly said, I am uncomfortable with doing that, I don't want to do this, I don't know if I'm comfortable with it. Astrid was not out to anyone, and her partner was really pressuring her into coming out, and I understand that coming out is an important thing, but I don't think it should be pressured onto anyone, and I don't think that you as a person owe it to any other human being to come out to them. You do not owe your sexuality to anyone. I didn't love the book for lots and lots of different reasons, actually. Those just being some of them. So I ended up rating it a 2.25. I think it would have gotten 3 stars or even 2.5 stars if the ending hadn't done what the ending did. I just really did not like how it wrapped up. I'm continuing on with more A.S. King books. That video will be out shortly. I hope you like it. Anyways, that's all. I'm sorry that this video, I guess I feel like I had a weird energy in this video. I wasn't as fun or laughing as I normally am, but you know what? We can't have all days be winners. Especially after releasing that soup video last week. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate all of you. Let me know down below if you've read any of those books and what you thought about them. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye.